Have you ever felt like the world around you is constantly shifting? Like everything you thought was stable is just a little less certain? In times like these, it can be hard to find that deep sense of peace that we all long for. Maybe you've asked yourself, where is God in all of this? Or how do I hold on when things seem so unpredictable? It's a question many of us have pondered, especially when life feels like it's pulling us in so many directions at once. But here's something that might surprise you. Even in the midst of uncertainty, God's message of love and grace remains steady. It's a love that doesn't depend on our circumstances, and it's a grace that's not measured by human standards. That's what we'll be reflecting on today, through one of Jesus' most powerful parables, the story of the workers in the vineyard. In this video, we'll take a deeper look at how God's grace is a gift, not based on what we've done or when we show up, but simply because of His generosity. This story helps us understand how God's perspective is so different from ours. And in doing so, it invites us into a life filled with joy, humility, and gratitude for the grace that's offered to us all. Let's begin by reflecting on the vineyard workers. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus tells the parable of a landowner who hires workers at different times throughout the day. Early in the morning, he hires a group of workers, agreeing to pay them a fair wage. Then, as the day goes on, he goes out again and hires more workers at various hours. Each group promised the same pay, regardless of how long they worked. It's easy to imagine that the workers who had been there since the morning were feeling pretty good about their situation. They'd worked hard under the hot sun, and they were probably expecting a bit more than those who had only worked a few hours. But when it came time to settle up at the end of the day, something unexpected happened. The landowner paid each group of workers the same amount, no matter how long they had worked. The morning workers, who had put in the most time, were understandably upset. They felt it wasn't fair after all. They had worked longer than everyone else, and yet the landowner's response was simple, yet profound. "Friend, I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" At first glance, this might seem like an unjust story. After all, we live in a world where fairness is often measured by effort and output, right? We're used to the idea that the more we work, the more we should be rewarded. But this parable reminds us that God's grace doesn't follow the rules we've set up. His generosity doesn't rely on how much we've earned or when we showed up. It's given freely, regardless of our circumstances. Now, this might be difficult to fully understand because, in our world, fairness is so often tied to what we deserve. But God's grace is not about fairness in the way we think of it. It's about love, compassion, and generosity. The landowner in this story wasn't trying to cheat anyone. Instead, he was showing kindness to those who had worked less by giving them the same reward as those who had worked longer. This teaches us a vital lesson. God's love doesn't depend on our level of achievement. It's not about how early we show up or how much we work for it. It's about His heart, which is overflowing with grace. And this is where the good news comes in. No matter how much time we think we've wasted, no matter how many mistakes we've made, God's love is not limited by what we think we deserve. Think about that for a moment. In a world that often rewards based on our achievements or timing, God's love and grace are given freely, equally, and generously. The workers who came at the last hour didn't earn their reward in the way we might expect, but they still received it. This is a powerful reminder of God's heart for us. He doesn't withhold His love because of how much we've accomplished or how long we've been working at life. His grace is not based on human standards. So, what does this mean for us in our everyday lives? It means that no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, God's grace is available to you. If you're feeling like you've been working hard to live a good life and are wondering if it's enough, remember this. God's grace isn't about how much you've done. It's about His love for you and His desire to bless you. You don't have to strive to earn it. And for those of us who might feel like we've come late to the table, maybe we've made mistakes or wandered away from God for a while, this parable reminds us that it's never too late. God's grace is always available, no matter when we show up. No matter what's in our past, God is generous with His love. He's waiting to welcome us with open arms, now that we've reflected on God's love and the generosity He shows. Let's continue to explore how we can embrace that grace in our daily lives. How can we move from simply knowing that God's grace is available to living in a way that reflects that grace to others? But before we dive deeper into that, I want to pause for a moment. Take a second to reflect. Are there areas in your life where you've been trying to earn God's love or prove that you're worthy of His grace? Or maybe you felt like it's too late to receive His love. Take heart, because today's message is a reminder that God's grace is a gift. No strings attached. So, let's pause and sit with that truth for a moment. His grace is a gift, and that's something we can celebrate. As we continue reflecting on God's grace, it's important to understand that the generosity of the landowner who paid all the workers the same amount wasn't just about being fair in the way we often think of fairness. It's also about showing the depth of God's love, which surpasses anything we might expect or deserve. When we think about grace in our lives, it's easy to get caught up in the idea of earning or deserving. We live in a world that constantly encourages us to prove ourselves, to show that we're worthy of love, of success, or of approval. Whether it's at work, in relationships, or even in our spiritual walk, we're taught to think in terms of transactions. If I work hard enough, if I'm good enough, then I'll receive what I deserve. But here's the truth that the parable of the workers in the vineyard reveals. God's love and grace don't work like that. They're not a reward for how hard we work or how deserving we are. They are gifts. Think about the workers in the vineyard again. The ones who worked the longest hours had the highest expectations. They believed that because they'd worked longer, they should receive more. But when they were paid the same as everyone else, they were upset. Why? Because they were comparing their efforts to those of others. They believed their hard work should have earned them something more, something extra, something that would prove that their time and energy had been valuable. But the landowner responded in love, reminding them that he had already given them exactly what they had agreed upon. His generosity in their eyes became a source of resentment rather than joy. This is where God's grace becomes both beautiful and challenging. God's generosity isn't a reflection of what we've done. It's simply a reflection of who He is, and it doesn't always match up with our expectations. Sometimes it can even make us uncomfortable, especially if we're the ones who've been working hard and see others being blessed in ways that seem unfair by our standards. But what if we started to look at grace differently? Instead of seeing it as something to be earned, what if we saw it as a gift that's given to everyone, freely, no matter when they show up? This shift in perspective can transform our entire outlook on life. Now, I know this can be difficult to accept, especially if we've spent a lot of time thinking that we have to measure up to be worthy of love, or if we've struggled with feelings of inadequacy or failure. It can be hard to let go of that mindset, especially in a world that tells us we need to prove ourselves at every turn. But God's grace calls us to something different. It invites us to lay down our striving and to receive. Instead, with open hands. In the parable, the morning workers felt that their hard work deserved more. In their eyes, the last-minute workers, those who only worked for an hour, hadn't earned the same reward. But God's grace works outside of those human categories. It's not about how much we've done, how long we've labored, or how many sacrifices we've made. It's about His heart for us, His love that's unconditional and lavish. Let's think about this for a moment. What does it look like to live as though God's grace is a gift, not something we've earned? It means learning to live in gratitude for what we've been given, rather than comparing ourselves to others. It means recognizing that no matter where we are in life, whether we feel we've been walking faithfully for years, or whether we're just now turning back to God, His grace is available to us all. And that's something to celebrate, not begrudge. In a world where comparison is so easy, where we're constantly measuring our success against others, this truth can be incredibly freeing. You don't have to compete for God's love. You don't have to prove you're worthy of it. It's already been given to you, just as it's been given to everyone else. It's not about how much you've done. It's about the depth of God's generosity and the kindness of His heart. Now, you might be thinking, but what if I don't feel like I'm worthy of that grace? What if I've messed up too many times or made too many mistakes? It's easy to feel disqualified from receiving God's love, especially when we carry the weight of past failures or regrets. But this parable shows us something powerful. God's grace is available no matter how late we come to the vineyard. It doesn't matter how far we've wandered or how many times we've fallen short. His grace is still there, ready to embrace us, just as it embraces everyone else. And that's the good news. No matter where you are in your journey, God's grace is for you. It's not too late. The vineyard is open, and the invitation is always there. It's not about when you start, but that you show up and receive the gift of grace that's waiting for you. One of the most beautiful aspects of this story is that God's grace is not just about us, it's about how we're called to reflect that grace to others. When we understand that we don't have to earn God's love, we begin to approach others with the same kind of generosity and mercy. Instead of holding on to resentment or jealousy when we see others receiving blessings we feel they don't deserve, we begin to celebrate with them. We start to realize that if God is generous with His grace, then we too are called to be generous in how we love others, regardless of their past or how deserving they seem. This can be one of the most profound shifts in how we live our daily lives. If we can embrace the reality of God's grace as a gift, something we don't earn, but freely receive, then we can extend that same gift to those around us. We no longer need to measure or compare, because we understand that God's love and grace aren't finite. There's enough for everyone. So, what does this mean for us today? It means we can rest in the assurance that God's love is not based on what we've done, but on who He is. It means we can live with gratitude, not striving to prove ourselves, but simply receiving His goodness. And it means we can share that grace with the world around us, offering it freely, just as it's been offered to us. Now that we've explored how God's grace isn't about what we've earned, let's take a moment to reflect on how we can live in that grace day by day. How can we let go of the need to prove ourselves and instead walk in the freedom that God's love provides? Let's pause and consider, in what areas of your life have you been striving to earn God's love or prove your worth? What would it look like to let go of that striving and simply receive His grace as a gift every single day? As we continue reflecting on the beauty of God's grace and the freedom it offers, let's dive a little deeper into how this truth impacts our everyday lives. It's one thing to understand that God's grace is a gift, but it's another thing to truly embrace the gift and live it out. And that's where the challenge and the beauty of God's grace comes in. When we stop measuring ourselves by the world's standards, we begin to see things differently. We stop thinking that we need to achieve more, do more, or be more, to be worthy of love. Instead, we begin to recognize that God's grace is already upon us, just as it was upon those workers in the vineyard who arrived late in the day. They didn't have to work any harder. They simply had to show up. And so it is with us. This shift in perspective is so freeing. It allows us to let go of guilt, shame, and insecurity, because we're no longer living by a scorecard. We no longer need to prove ourselves worthy of God's love. His love has already been given to us, and it's unconditional. No matter how late we feel we've come, no matter how many times we've stumbled, God's love remains the same. But there's another layer to this message that we can't ignore. When we truly understand the depth of God's grace, it not only transforms the way we see ourselves, it also transforms the way we see others. Let's go back to the workers in the vineyard for a moment. When the early workers saw the last-minute workers receiving the same pay, they were upset. They couldn't understand how it was fair for someone who worked only a few hours to receive the same reward as someone who had toiled in the sun all day. They were looking at the situation through their own lens of fairness, of earning, and of deserving. But the landowner representing God's grace challenged them to see things from a different perspective. He didn't owe them more than what they had agreed upon, and he wasn't interested in comparing them to the others. This is the crux of the message. God's grace is not about comparing who's worked harder or longer. It's not about who deserves more. It's about the extravagant generosity of God, who gives freely, regardless of how long we've been on the journey or how much we've done. And when we truly grasp this truth, we begin to see that God's grace extends beyond us, beyond our own little world, to everyone, no matter their history, their mistakes, or how late they might come to the vineyard. It's so easy to fall into the trap of comparison. In our day-to-day lives, we compare ourselves to others all the time. We compare our achievements, our families, our careers, and even our faith journeys. We measure how far we've come and wonder if we're doing enough. And sometimes when we see others being blessed or receiving grace that we feel they don't deserve, it can stir up feelings of resentment or jealousy. But the truth of the vineyard parable is this: God's grace isn't about who deserves it more or who worked harder. It's about His love, which is given freely and generously to all. And when we really understand this, it shifts the way we see everyone around us. Rather than feeling competitive or jealous of the blessings others receive, we begin to rejoice with them. We understand that God's grace is just as much for them as it is for us. This isn't just a change in perspective, it's a whole new way of living. Instead of resenting the success or blessings of others, we celebrate them. And when we ourselves experience God's generosity, we don't hold on to it as if it's something we've earned. We pass it on. This is where the heart of the gospel comes alive. We are called to reflect God's generosity in our own lives. We are called to show grace to others, even when they haven't earned it in our eyes. Think about how that would change the world around us if, instead of holding grudges, we chose to forgive freely. If, instead of comparing ourselves to others, we celebrated their victories. If, instead of hoarding God's love for ourselves, we shared it with everyone, regardless of their past or present circumstances. This kind of grace is radical. It doesn't make sense to the world. The world tells us that fairness means everyone gets what they deserve, based on how much they've worked or how good they've been. But God's grace says, I will give you what you don't deserve because I love you. It's a radical love that transforms the way we live, the way we love, and the way we treat others. And as we begin to live in the freedom of God's grace, we start to see how it opens up a life of peace. When we stop comparing ourselves, when we stop striving to prove our worth, we find rest, we find joy, we find the kind of peace that doesn't depend on our performance, but on God's unwavering love. This peace is something the world can't give. It's a peace that only comes when we fully embrace the reality that we are loved by God, not because of what we do, but because of who He is. This peace doesn't mean that life will always be easy or that we won't face challenges, but it does mean that no matter what happens, we can rest in the assurance that God's grace is enough for us. His love is enough for us. And that's a peace that passes all understanding. So, as we reflect on this parable, let's ask ourselves, how can we live out this kind of grace in our daily lives? How can we stop comparing ourselves to others and start embracing the gift of God's love for us? And how can we reflect that grace to the people around us, whether it's through forgiveness, encouragement, or simply showing love without expectation? These are powerful questions to ask because they shape the way we live. When we truly understand that God's grace is a gift and not something we can earn, we start to live differently. We stop trying to prove ourselves and start resting in His love. And in doing so, we become vessels of His grace, sharing it freely. With the world around us, let's take a moment to think about how God's grace has impacted our lives. Have we been living as if we need to earn it? Or have we been receiving it as the gift it truly is? And more importantly, how can we offer that grace to others in a way that reflects the heart of God? As we continue this journey, let's embrace the freedom of knowing that we don't have to prove ourselves. God's grace is already enough. As we come to the final part of this reflection on the parable of the workers in the vineyard, I want to take a moment to reflect on the powerful truth that God's grace is a gift, not a transaction. We've already explored how His generosity is available to all, regardless of how much time we've spent striving or how late we feel we've come to the table. Now, let's dig into how this understanding of grace can bring lasting transformation in our lives and how it can shape the way we live, love, and engage with others. The heart of the vineyard parable is an invitation to embrace a life of grace, not just as a concept, but as a way of living. When we truly accept that God's grace is not something we earn, it sets us free. Free from comparison, free from striving, and free from the pressure to prove ourselves. We start to see our lives as a gift rather than something we have to earn, and that's a powerful shift. It's a shift from performance-based living to grace-based living. Now, this doesn't mean we stop striving to grow or stop working to be the best versions of ourselves. It doesn't mean that we ignore our responsibilities or stop caring about the people around us. Rather, it means that we do all of those things from a place of peace and gratitude, not out of a need to earn God's favor. We work, we love, we serve because we have already received God's love. And because of that, we want to reflect that love to others. Think about this. When we live from a place of grace, we begin to offer that same grace to others. Instead of judging others for how much they've done or comparing their journey to our own, we extend the same love and kindness that God has given to us. We become more forgiving, more patient, and more understanding. We stop holding grudges, and we stop trying to control or manipulate situations. Instead, we start seeing others with the same eyes that God sees us, with love, compassion, and understanding. And this isn't just about how we treat others, it's also about how we treat ourselves. If we can embrace God's grace, we can begin to forgive ourselves for our mistakes. We can stop holding on to guilt or shame, and we can stop trying to make up for past wrongs. We realize that God's grace is big enough to cover everything. That doesn't mean we take His grace for granted or live recklessly. But it does mean we stop living in constant fear that we're not enough or that we'll never measure up. We start living in the freedom of knowing that we are already loved, accepted, and forgiven. One of the most beautiful aspects of God's grace is how it impacts our relationships. As we start to grasp how deeply loved we are, we begin to extend that same love to those around us. We no longer live in a world of competition or comparison. We don't need to prove we're better or more deserving than someone else. Instead, we see each person as a recipient of God's grace, just as we are. We celebrate their victories. We empathize with their struggles, and we walk alongside them without judgment. I want to pause here and ask you to reflect on this. How has God's grace impacted your relationships? Are there areas where you've struggled with comparison, jealousy, or judgment? And are there people in your life that God is calling you to extend more grace to, whether in forgiveness, patience, or understanding? The power of grace is not just in how it transforms us, but in how it transforms the world around us. When we live out grace, we make the world a little more like the kingdom of God. As we conclude this reflection, I want to leave you with one final thought. God's grace is always enough. It's enough to cover our past mistakes. It's enough to heal our wounds. It's enough to bring us peace when life feels out of control. And it's enough to transform our hearts so that we can love and serve others with the same grace that God has shown us. And no matter where you are in life, whether you're just beginning your walk with God or whether you've been walking with Him for years, His grace is available to you. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to be perfect. God is waiting for you with open arms, offering you His love and forgiveness, not because of anything you've done, but simply because He loves you. So, as we end this video, I want to encourage you to live in the freedom of God's grace. Let go of the pressure to earn His love, and instead, receive it as the gift it truly is. Let that grace fill your heart, and let it overflow into every area of your life. When you do, you'll find a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace that comes from knowing you're loved exactly as you are. If today's message has spoken to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you struggled with feelings of inadequacy or the pressure to prove yourself? How have you experienced God's grace in your own life? Feel free to share your reflections in the comments below. And if this message has encouraged you, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content that's designed to inspire and uplift you on your journey of faith. Remember, God's grace is not based on when you show up, how much you've done, or how deserving you are. It's simply a gift freely given because He loves you, and that love will never change. With God by your side, every day is filled with hope, grace, and peace. May you walk in that grace today and every day. Thank you for watching.